Part 1. The Accidental Entry. Daeho wiped the sweat from his forehead as he crawled through the narrow ventilation shaft. The diplomatic station orbiting the alien world was falling apart, and as the only human engineer on board, fixing it was his job. The metal groaned under his weight, but he'd done this 100 times before. Just another day fixing alien junk, he muttered to himself, adjusting his tool belt. The Corvians built everything too big and too fancy, but they never thought about maintenance access. Typical. He was reaching for a loose coupling when the entire section gave way beneath him. The metal shrieked as it tore apart, and suddenly Daeho was falling through darkness, his tools scattering around him like angry metal birds. He crashed through what felt like silk curtains, rolled across a smooth floor, and finally came to a stop against something warm and solid. His head was spinning, his shoulder throbbed, but he was alive. That was something. "Where the hell am I?" he groaned, pushing himself up on his elbows. The room around him was massive, with walls that curved upward like the inside of a giant egg. Soft blue light came from crystals embedded in the ceiling, casting everything in an otherworldly glow. Then he heard it, a sound that made his blood run cold. Not quite a scream, not quite a roar, but something in between. Something in pain. Daeho scrambled to his feet, his engineer's instincts kicking in. Someone needed help. But as his eyes adjusted to the strange light, he realized where he was. The royal symbols carved into the walls, the precious stones scattered across the floor, the ceremonial weapons mounted on pedestals. He was in the Corvian Queen's private chamber, the most forbidden place on the entire station. "Oh, I'm so dead," he whispered. The sound came again, louder this time, and Daeho spun around to see the source. In the center of the room, on a raised platform covered in what looked like expensive fabrics, was Queen Neelith herself. She was nothing like the propaganda posters. Those showed her as a noble warrior, standing tall with her 4 arms spread, wide, her insect-like features proud and intimidating. This queen was curled up in a ball, her usually pristine exoskeleton dull and cracked, her breathing rapid and shallow. Daeho had never seen a Corvian up close before. She was huge, easily 8 feet tall even while lying down, with skin that looked like polished black marble streaked with gold. Her face was alien but somehow beautiful, with large eyes that glowed like amber in the crystal light. Right now those eyes were squeezed shut in obvious agony. Every instinct told him to run, to find the nearest exit and pretend this never happened. The Corvians executed anyone who entered the Queen's private chambers without permission. It was their most sacred law, punishable by the most painful death they could imagine. But the Queen made that sound again, a keening wail that seemed to come from deep in her chest, and something inside Daeho just couldn't walk away. His grandfather had been a doctor back on Earth, and he taught Daeho one thing above all others: when someone is suffering, you help them. It doesn't matter who they are, what they look like, or whether they're your enemy. Pain is pain, and it's wrong to ignore it. "Okay, Your Majesty," he said quietly, pulling his emergency medical kit from his belt. "Let's see what we can do." He approached slowly, his hands visible and empty except for the small medical scanner. The Queen's eyes opened at the sound of his voice, and for a moment they stared at each other across the divide of species and culture. Her eyes were intelligent, Daeho realized. Scared, but intelligent. And they were asking him the same question. He was asking himself, "What happens now?" "I'm not here to hurt you," he said, knowing she probably couldn't understand him, but hoping his tone would carry the message. "I'm here to help." The Queen's mandibles clicked together, a sound that might have been speech in her language, but she didn't call for guards. She didn't try to attack him. She just watched as this small, fragile human approached her with nothing but a medical kit and good intentions. Daeho activated his scanner and began to read the results. His basic xenobiology training was kicking in, and what he saw made him frown. The Queen's vital signs were all wrong. Her body temperature was too high, her breathing too fast, and there were signs of infection in her lower abdomen. This wasn't just pain. This was a medical emergency. "I think I can help you," he said, more to himself than to her. "But you're going to have to trust me." The Queen's eyes never left his face as he opened his medical kit and began to work. And in that moment, neither of them knew that this accidental meeting would change the fate of both their species forever. Part 2. The Healing Touch. Daeho's scanner beeped softly as he studied the readings. His hands were shaking slightly, but not from fear anymore. This was something he understood. The Queen wasn't dying from some alien disease or poison. She had a severe infection, and from what he could tell, it was in her reproductive system. "This is bad," he muttered, scrolling through the data on his small device. "Really bad." Queen Nilith watched him with those glowing amber eyes, her breathing still labored, but somehow calmer now that someone was actually trying to help her. She said something in her clicking language, and though Daeho couldn't understand the words, the tone was clear. She was asking what was wrong. "Infection," he said simply, pointing to his scanner and then to her lower abdomen. "Big problem." The Queen's eyes widened, and she made a sound that was almost like a whimper. Daeho realized she understood more human speech than he'd thought. That was going to make this easier. He was reaching for his antiseptic when he heard footsteps in the corridor outside, heavy rhythmic footsteps that could only belong to Corvian guards. Daeho froze, his heart hammering in his chest. This was it. They'd found him, and now he was going to die in the most painful way possible. But instead of bursting through the door with weapons drawn, the footsteps stopped just outside. There was a series of clicks and chirps, Corvian speech, and then Queen Nilith responded in the same language. Her voice was weak but authoritative. Whatever she said, it worked. The footsteps moved away. "You told them to leave us alone," Daeho said, not really asking. "Thank you." The Queen clicked her mandibles in what might have been acknowledgement, then gestured weakly toward her abdomen. The message was clear. Get back to work. Daeho opened his medical kit fully and laid out what he had. It wasn't much. Some antiseptic, basic surgical tools, painkillers, and antibiotics designed for human physiology. He'd have to guess at dosages and hope that Corvian biology was similar enough to human biology for the drugs to work. "This is going to hurt at first," he warned her, holding up the antiseptic applicator, "but then it should feel better." He approached slowly, giving her time to object or pull away. Instead, the Queen actually shifted position to give him better access to the infected area. The trust she was showing him was incredible, especially given that her own people considered humans to be violent barbarians. The infection was worse than his scanner had indicated. The tissue around the Queen's egg-laying chamber was swollen and discolored, and there was clear evidence of bacterial contamination. If this had been a human patient, they would have needed major surgery and weeks of intensive care. But Daeho wasn't a doctor, and this wasn't a human hospital. He was an engineer with basic medical training, working with a first aid kit in an alien palace. He'd have to make do with what he had. He started with the antiseptic, cleaning the area as gently as possible. The Queen hissed in pain but didn't pull away. Her claws, which could have torn him apart without effort, remained relaxed at her sides. "You're being really brave," he told her, trying to keep his voice calm and reassuring. "Much braver than I would be if our positions were reversed." As he worked, more footsteps approached the chamber. This time they didn't stop outside. 3 Corvian attendants entered, their eyes wide with shock at the scene before them. A human, touching their sacred queen, performing some kind of medical procedure. Daeho expected them to attack him immediately. Instead, they just stood there frozen with confusion. One of them started to move forward, but Queen Nilith spoke sharply, and they all stopped. "Your people are loyal," Daeho observed, applying antibiotic cream to the infected tissue. "They don't understand what's happening, but they trust your judgment." The Queen made a sound that might have been laughter, though it was hard to tell with alien vocal cords. She spoke a few words in broken human speech. "They think you magic." Daeho almost smiled despite the seriousness of the situation. "Not magic, just medicine. Though I guess they might look the same to someone who's never seen it before." Continued working, his movements careful and precise. The infection was responding well to the antiseptic, and the antibiotics seemed to be having an effect. The Queen's breathing was becoming more regular, and some of the tension was leaving. her massive frame. But what struck Deho most was how she was looking at him. There was wonder in those amber eyes and something else. Something like gratitude, but deeper, as if she was seeing not just him, but his entire species, in a completely new light. "No one has ever touched me like this," she said suddenly, her words slow but clear. With kindness. The statement hit Deho harder than he'd expected. He paused in his work and looked up at her face. "What do you mean?" "Corvians, we do not touch for comfort. Touch is for dominance, for breeding, for battle." She was quiet for a moment, then added, "Never for healing, never gentle." Deho understood then. This wasn't just about medical treatment. This was about showing compassion to someone who had never experienced it before, and not just any someone, the leader of an entire species that humanity was supposed to be afraid of. "Well," he said, returning to his work, "humans touch for lots of reasons. To help, to comfort, to show we care. It's just what we do." The Queen was silent for a long time after that, but Deho could feel something changing in the room. The attendants were no longer looking at him with suspicion. They were watching with fascination, as if they were witnessing something miraculous. And maybe they were. Part 3. Broken Barriers. 3 days had passed since Deho's accidental fall into the Queen's chamber, and everything had changed. Queen Nilith was sitting up now, her golden-streaked exoskeleton gleaming with health. The infection was completely gone, and she moved with the fluid grace that Deho had only seen in old documentary footage of Corvian royalty. But she hadn't let him leave. Not as a prisoner, that much was clear. The guards outside her chamber had been given strict orders to protect him, not contain him. Food was brought to him regularly, and he'd been given access to the royal bathing facilities. Still, every time he mentioned returning to his duties, the Queen found another reason for him to stay. "Tell me again about your grandfather," she said, her human speech improving with each conversation. She was perched on the edge of her sleeping platform, her forearms gesturing expressively as she spoke. Deho was sitting cross-legged on the floor nearby, working on his damaged tools. The fall had bent several of his wrenches, and he needed something to keep his hands busy while they talked. "He was a doctor back on Earth," Deho said, straightening a particularly stubborn piece of metal. "Worked in the poorest parts of the city, where people couldn't afford proper medical care. He used to say that healing wasn't a business, it was a duty." "Duty to whom?" Nilith asked, leaning forward with genuine curiosity. "To everyone. To humanity, I guess. He believed that if you have the ability to help someone, then you have the responsibility to do it. Doesn't matter if they can pay you back or not." The Queen was quiet for a long moment, processing this. Finally, she said, "This is very strange to us. In Corvian culture, everything has a price. Every favor must be repaid. Every debt must be settled." "So what's my debt to you?" Deho asked, looking up from his tools. "I mean, I did break into your bedroom and all." Nilith made that clicking sound that he'd learned was her version of laughter. "You saved my life, Deho. According to our laws, that makes you my creditor, not my debtor." "But I don't want anything from you," he said simply. "I helped because you needed help. That's it." The Queen stared at him with those amber eyes, and Deho could practically see her trying to process this concept. The idea that someone would risk their life for a stranger, without expecting anything in return, was apparently as foreign to her as her clicking language was to him. "My advisors think you're trying to trick me," she said finally. "They believe this is some elaborate human plot to gain access to our secrets." Deho snorted. "If it is, nobody told me about it. I'm just an engineer who fell through a vent. Trust me, if humanity had some master plan involving your bedroom, they would have sent someone a lot more qualified than me." This got another laugh from Nilith, but then her expression turned serious. "There is something you should know, Deho, something that makes what you did more significant than you realize." She rose from her platform and walked to the far wall, where a series of portraits were displayed. They showed Corvian females in various poses of authority and power. All of them wore the same style of crown that Nilith wore now. "These are my predecessors," she said, gesturing to the portraits. Queens of the Corvian Empire, going back nearly 1,000 years. Deho joined her at the wall, studying the faces. Even to his human eyes, he could see the family resemblance. The same facial structure, the same proud bearing, the same intelligent eyes. They're all related to you? He asked. All descended from the same genetic line, Nilith confirmed. The royal bloodline has been carefully maintained for generations. Only queens can produce fertile offspring, and only the royal family can produce queens. Something in her tone made Deho look at her more closely. But the bloodline is dying out, she said quietly. My mother had only one fertile daughter, me. My sister died in the last war with the hegemony. My cousins have all proven unable to reproduce. The implications hit Deho like a physical blow. You're the last one. I am the last fertile queen of my species, Nilith confirmed. If I die without producing offspring, the Corvian Empire dies with me. Our entire civilization will collapse within a generation. Deho felt his knees go weak. He'd known the treatment was important, but this changed everything. The infection would have killed you. Within days, she nodded. My physicians tried everything they knew, but our medicine has certain limitations. We are very good at treating injuries and diseases of the exoskeleton, but internal medicine is not our strength. So when I fell through that vent, you saved not just my life, but the future of my entire species. Nilith turned to face him fully. And you did it without knowing any of this. You risked execution to help a stranger, expecting nothing in return. Deho sank down onto a nearby cushion, overwhelmed. I heard you in pain and I couldn't walk away. Anyone would have done the same thing. No, Nilith said firmly. Anyone would not have done the same thing. My own people who have served me faithfully for years, stood outside that door and listened to me suffer because they were afraid to act without permission. But you, a human who had every reason to fear me, chose to help instead. She knelt down beside him, bringing her face level with his. This is what I do not understand about your species. You show mercy to your enemies. You risk yourselves for strangers. You give aid without expecting payment. These are not the actions of the barbaric warmongers our propaganda describes. Maybe your propaganda is wrong, Deho suggested quietly. Maybe it is, she agreed. Maybe we have been wrong about many things. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, both lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Nilith spoke again. I have been queen for 15 years, Deho. In that time, I have received tribute from 100 worlds, commanded fleets that could destroy star systems, and held the lives of billions in my hands. She paused, looking down at her own claws. But no one has ever shown me the simple kindness you showed me 3 days ago. No one has ever touched me with gentleness or worked to ease my pain without being ordered to do so. I'm sorry, Deho said. That sounds lonely. It was, she admitted. Until now. Part 4. Unlikely Alliance. The communication came at 600 hours ship time. Captain Tae-min was drinking his morning coffee when the priority message flashed across his personal terminal. He nearly choked on the bitter liquid as he read the words. Engineer Deho has been in unauthorized contact with the Corvian Queen for 72 hours, requesting immediate extraction orders. Tae-min set down his cup with shaking hands. This was exactly what he'd been afraid of when the diplomatic mission was approved. Humans getting too close to aliens, forgetting that they were supposed to be enemies, not friends. He activated his secure comm channel. Get me Admiral Park, Priority 1. Within minutes, the grizzled face of Admiral Park appeared on his screen. The man looked like he hadn't slept in days. You've seen the reports? Park asked without preamble. Just got them. Sir, we need to extract. Deho immediately. Who knows what kind of classified information he's already given them? Park shook his head slowly. It's too late for that, Captain. The story is already spreading through both governments. Apparently the Queen has been telling her advisors about what happened. Tae-min felt his stomach drop. What exactly has she been telling them? That a human saved her life, that we're not the monsters they thought we were. And get this, she's calling for peace talks. Peace talks? Tae-min couldn't hide his disgust. Sir, this is obviously some kind of trap. The Corvians are using this engineer to manipulate us. Maybe, Park said, but he didn't sound convinced. Or maybe one man's act of kindness just changed the course of galactic history. Meanwhile, on the Corvian flagship, General Vextar was having his own crisis meeting. The beetle-like alien paced back and forth across his command chamber, his 4 arms gesturing angrily as he spoke. "This is madness, my queen," he said into his communication device. "You cannot seriously be considering an alliance with these humans." Queen Nilath's voice came through the speaker, calm but firm. "I am not just considering it, General. I am ordering it. Prepare a formal proposal for technology exchange. But, Your Majesty, they are our enemies. For generations we have been taught that humans are violent, unpredictable, dangerous to our way of life. And what has this engineer shown us?" The Queen asked. "He was violent, unpredictable, dangerous." Vextar clicked his mandibles in frustration. "One individual does not represent an entire species, my queen. This could be an elaborate deception." "To what end?" "He risked his life to save mine, expecting nothing in return. What kind of deception involves genuine self-sacrifice?" Back on the human ship, Tae-min was making calls of his own. He'd served in the military for 20 years, fought in 3 different alien conflicts, and seen what happened when humans let their guard down around other species. It never ended well. "Commander Minho, I need you to gather the senior staff," he said into his communicator. "Emergency meeting in conference room A." Within an hour, 6 of his most trusted officers were seated around the polished metal table. Their faces showed a mixture of concern and confusion. "Gentlemen," Tae-min began, "we have a situation. One of our engineers has apparently become friendly with the enemy queen. Command is actually considering peace negotiations based on this contact." Lieutenant Sujin, the youngest officer present, raised his hand tentatively. "Sir, if there's a chance for peace, isn't that worth exploring?" Tae-min fixed him with a hard stare. "Lieutenant, how long have you been in service?" 2 years, sir." 2 years, Tae-min repeated. "I've been fighting aliens for 20. Let me tell you something about peace negotiations with hostile species. They don't work. The moment we let our guard down, they'll strike. It's what they do." "But, sir," Sujin persisted, "the reports say the engineer actually saved the Queen's life. Why would she want to harm us after that?" "Because aliens don't think like us," Tae-min slammed his hand on the table. "They don't have our sense of honor, our gratitude, our humanity. This is probably all part of some elaborate plan to get access to our technology." On the Corvian ship, Vextar was making similar arguments. He'd called together his most loyal commanders, all of them veterans of the long conflict with humanity. "Consider the timing," he said, pointing to a tactical display. "Their engineer accidentally falls into the Queen's chamber just when she becomes ill. He saves her life with primitive human medicine, and now she wants to share our most advanced biotechnology with them. Does this not seem suspicious to you?" Commander Rathka, a scarred veteran of the Battle of Kepler-7, nodded agreement. "The humans are clever, General. This could be exactly the kind of long-term infiltration strategy they would use." "Exactly," Vextar said. "And if the Queen goes through with this alliance, we'll be handing them the keys to our entire civilization." But even as both sides plotted and planned, something unexpected was happening. The story of Daeho's kindness was spreading through both fleets, carried by maintenance crews, communications officers, and junior personnel who talked to each other across the communication channels. Young humans who had never seen an act of genuine compassion between species were inspired by the engineer's courage. Young Corvians who had been raised to hate humans were confused by stories of gentleness and healing. Commander Minho found Tae-min in his quarters later that evening, staring out at the stars through the viewport. "Captain, there's something you should know," Minho said carefully. "The crew is talking about the engineer, about what happened." "What are they saying?" Tae-min asked without turning around. "They're saying maybe we've been wrong about the Corvians. Maybe this is our chance to end the war for good." Tae-min's reflection in the viewport showed a man aging before his time. "And what do you think, old friend?" Minho was quiet for a long moment. "I think that engineer showed more courage in 3 days than most of us show in a lifetime, and maybe that means something." On both ships, the battle lines were being drawn, not between human and Corvian this time, but between those who believed in the possibility of peace, and those who thought such beliefs were dangerous naivety. The fate of two civilizations now hung in the balance, all because one human couldn't walk away from someone in pain. Part 5. New Beginnings. The peace talks were scheduled for noon, station time. Daeho stood in Queen Nileth's chamber, adjusting the collar of the formal diplomatic uniform they'd given him. He still couldn't believe he was about to witness history in the making. "You look nervous," Nileth observed, her amber eyes showing what he'd learned to recognize as amusement. "I'm an engineer," Daeho replied, fumbling with the unfamiliar buttons. 2 weeks ago, my biggest worry was fixing broken air recyclers. Now I'm supposed to be some kind of peace ambassador." "You already are a peace ambassador," the Queen said gently. "You just didn't know it yet." She moved to the window overlooking the station's main conference hall. Below them, representatives from both species were taking their seats at a massive circular table. The tension in the room was visible even from their elevated position. "My advisors still think this is madness," Nileth admitted. "Half of them believe you're part of some elaborate human deception. And the other half? The other half have watched how you've cared for me these past 2 weeks. They've seen you bring me food when I was too weak to eat, help me walk when the healing made me dizzy, sit by my side during the fever dreams." She turned to face him. "They've seen what kindness looks like, and they want more of it in their lives." Daeho was about to respond when alarms started blaring throughout the station. Emergency lights flashed red, and the automated voice began its warning. "Security breach. All personnel to emergency stations. Security breach." "What's happening?" Daeho asked, but Nileth was already moving toward her communication panel. The answer came in the form of her personal guard, a massive Corvian named Thexmal, who burst through the chamber doors. "My queen, we must move you immediately," he said, his usual calm shattered. "Extremists from both sides have seized the conference hall. They're demanding that the talks be cancelled and that the human be executed as a spy." Nileth's mandibles clicked together in anger. "General Vextar, leading the Corvian faction, yes. The human Captain Taimin is with them. They have explosives." Daeho felt his knees go weak. "They're going to blow up the peace talks?" "They're going to blow up the entire conference section," Thexmal confirmed grimly. "Unless their demands are met in the next 10 minutes. Nileth moved with sudden purpose, striding toward her weapon rack. "Then we stop them." "Your Majesty, no," Thexmal protested. "You cannot risk yourself. If something happens to you, if something happens to me, my species dies anyway," she replied, strapping on her ceremonial sword. "But if we let them destroy this chance for peace, both our species lose their future." Daeho grabbed her arm gently. "Wait. There might be another way." She looked at him questioningly, and he took a deep breath before continuing. "They want to stop the peace talks because they think I'm a spy, right? They think this whole thing is fake, that humans can't really care about Corvians." "Yes, but—" "So we prove them wrong. We show them that what happened between us is real." Before anyone could stop him, Daeho was moving toward the door. Nileth caught up with him in the corridor. "Where are you going?" "To the conference hall. If they want to see whether human compassion is real or fake, I'll show them." The journey through the station's corridors felt like the longest walk of Daeho's life. Emergency personnel rushed past them, evacuating civilians and trying to contain the crisis. But Nileth stayed beside him every step of the way, her presence giving him courage he didn't know he possessed. They reached the conference hall to find it in chaos. The extremists had barricaded themselves in the center of the room, surrounded by both human and Corvian hostages. Explosive devices were clearly visible, their red lights blinking ominously. Captain Taimin stood with General Vextar behind a makeshift barrier of overturned tables. Both were armed, both looked desperate. "There he is!" Taimin shouted when he saw Daeho, the traitor who sold out his own species. "I didn't sell out anyone," Daeho called back, stepping into the open space between the extremists and the door. "I helped someone who was in pain. That's all." "Lies." Vexatar's voice boomed across the hall. "Humans do not help other species. You are deceivers, manipulators, destroyers of worlds." "Then why am I here?" Daeho asked, spreading his arms wide. "If I'm such a deceiver, why am I walking toward your explosives instead of running away?" "Because this is all part of your plan," Taemin snarled. You've brainwashed the Queen, made her think humans can be trusted. Have I? Daeho looked back at Neelith, who had followed him into the hall despite the danger. Your Majesty, tell them. Have I ever asked you for anything? Have I ever tried to manipulate you or use you? Neelith stepped forward, her voice carrying clearly through the hall. This human has asked me for nothing except the chance to help me heal. He has given me kindness, comfort, and friendship, expecting nothing in return. Words, Vexatar spat. Anyone can say words. Then let me show you, Daeho said quietly. He began walking toward the barricade. Slowly, steadily, his hands visible and empty. The extremists raised their weapons, but he didn't stop. What are you doing? Taemin demanded. Proving a point, Daeho replied. You say humans are violent, that we can't be trusted, but I'm walking toward armed enemies to try to save lives. If I'm such a monster, why would I do that? He was halfway to the barricade when Vextar made his decision. The general's weapon discharged, sending a plasma bolt straight toward Daeho's chest. But Neelith was faster. The Queen threw herself forward, her larger body intercepting the blast meant for the human. The energy bolt struck her in the shoulder, spinning her around and sending her crashing to the floor. No! Daeho cried, dropping to his knees beside her. The hall fell silent. Everyone, extremist and moderate alike, stared at the sight of their queen bleeding on the floor, having taken a shot meant for a human. Why? Vextar whispered, his weapon lowering. Why would you do that for him? Neelith struggled to sit up, supported by Daeho's gentle hands. When she spoke, her voice was weak but clear. Because he would have done the same for me. Because this is what friends do for each other. Because some things are worth protecting even if it costs us everything. The weapons fell from suddenly nerveless fingers. Captain Taemin stared at the scene before him, his face pale with shock. This isn't how it was supposed to go, he stammered. No, Daeho said, carefully checking Neelith's wound. It's supposed to go like this. When someone is hurt, you help them. When someone needs protection, you protect them. When someone offers friendship, you accept it. He looked up at the stunned faces around him. That's what humans do. That's what Corvians do too, apparently. Maybe it's what all intelligent species do when they're given the chance. The peace talks resumed 3 days later, after Neelith had recovered from her wound. The extremists, faced with the undeniable proof of interspecies compassion, laid down their arms and agreed to participate in the negotiations. 6 months later, Daeho stood in the same conference hall, now converted into a medical training facility. Human doctors worked alongside Corvian healers, sharing knowledge and techniques that benefited both species. Ambassador Daeho, a voice called out. He turned to see Dr. Yuna, one of the first human physicians to arrive for the exchange program. Just, Daeho, please, he said with a smile. I'm still getting used to all the fancy titles. How are our first patients doing? She asked, nodding toward the medical bay where Queen Neelith's offspring were being monitored. Perfectly healthy, Daeho reported happily. The Queen's eggs developed normally, and the hatchlings are thriving. The royal line is secure. More importantly, those hatchlings would grow up in a universe where humans and Corvians were allies rather than enemies. They would never know the fear and hatred that had defined previous generations. That evening, Daeho sat with Neelith in what had once been her forbidden chamber and was now simply her home. The Queen was teaching him to read Corvian script while he helped her practice human idioms, you know, she said, setting down her tablet. I never properly thanked you. For what? For falling through my ceiling, she said with that clicking laugh he'd grown to love. For showing me that the universe didn't have to be as cold and lonely as I thought it was. Daeho smiled, thinking back to that terrifying day when a simple maintenance job had changed everything. Thank you for not calling the guards, he replied, and for teaching me that sometimes the best thing you can do is just be kind to someone. Who needs it? Outside the windows, human and Corvian ships flew together in peaceful formation, their crews working side by side to explore the mysteries of space. It wasn't the future anyone had expected, but it was the future they'd built together. One act of compassion at a time,